a much longer chapter than the previous ones. Um, we see Mary meet Martha, a maid who works at Misselthwaite Manor, and Martha is not really a proper maid. She's just sort of a local girl who works and does the maid work. Because the master of the house doesn't really keep the house like a house like this would be expected. You would expect that in a house like this, you would have a large size family and there would be guests at a regular instance, and there would be parties and dancing and whatever. And so that everything would have to be kept properly. Here, he has a minimal staff, and it's just pretty much him. And now it's him and Mary. Um, Mary behaves atrociously, and she's just a horrible person. She acts racist, but that's more of a class thing than a race thing for her because as she was growing up, it's like, oh, there's people and then there's servants. And where she was, the servants were invariably Indian, people from the country of India or the colony of India. Wasn't really country at that point because it was just completely under the control of England. And so she was brought up this way. And here she is, and, she's in this country, and it's her and servants. Except now she's beginning to realize that, the servants might actually be people. Um, and she was helpless. This is someone who can't put on her own clothes. She doesn't know how to slide socks onto her feet. She just like, okay, dress me. Holds her arms up and expects the shirt to be lowered down. It's not like she can't, it's Martha even brought up, well, it's like, well, if you have buttons in the back, of course we do that for each other. But the thing is that she doesn't even know how to do the buttons in the front. She doesn't know how to lace her boot. She doesn't know any of this. And, these are things that typically a small child learns. And in Martha's house, everyone knew how to do this stuff except for the little babies who didn't have like the finger dexterity. And there's an interesting thing here. In the Bible, there was a pair of sisters, Mary and Martha, who were good friends with Jesus. And at one point, Mary and Martha were hosting Jesus and all the disciples. And so Jesus and the disciples were at Mary and Martha's house. And Mary was just sort of sitting there listening to Jesus and sort of asking questions and just sort of hanging out. And Martha's scurrying around, making big plates of food and feeding everybody. And at one point, Martha says, Jesus, hey, tell Mary to help. And Jesus is like, well, Mary's doing the important thing right now. And so here you have this instance where Mary, the main character in the secret garden, is doing nothing. And Martha is the one scurrying around. So this is kind of an inversion because here you have Martha probably being the better person and doing the better things in this instance. Now, Martha talks about her brother Dickon. And Dickon has a way with animals. And he's kind and he treats them well and they follow him. So he has a pony that was a feral pony that's now tamed in his. And traditionally, there are two ways that you break a horse and get it to allow you to ride it. The first way is you take a saddle and you hop on the horse and you let it buck and throw and bite and kick until it gets tired, if you manage to stay on the horse. And once it gets all tired out, then you can ride it. The other way is you're nice and friendly to it. So she fed the horse, so Dickon fed the horse bits of bread, picked tender grass for it. And so the horse became his friend and began to trust him. So all he has to do is just walk up and climb on the horse, and the horse trusts him. So after that, after she left Martha and had her breakfast and only had some of it, and Martha's like, you have all of this food, you need to eat more, because there are a lot of people who don't understand hunger. And Mary said, I've never been hungry. And that's quite possibly the case, because she had servants from the time she was an infant. And it's like, okay, she wants food, she gets food. She wants whatever, she gets it. And so this is a big learning step for Mary. And she goes outside and she goes into the gardens. And she goes through one set of gardens and finds winter vegetables. Now, there are some of these gardens which were described as being under glass. And one of the things that's done in temperate areas, places where it gets cold, is something that's not quite a greenhouse. The word's eluding me right now. But it's this low frame with glass on top. So it acts like a 6-inch tall greenhouse. So that traps the heat from the sun under the glass, stops the convection, so that you have this warm air from the sun trapped. And that allows you to grow crops in the winter in areas that wouldn't necessarily support them. So she saw some of this, and she went to an orchard, and then she found an area that was walled off, that she couldn't find a door to, because she was looking for the secret garden, because that's the title of the book. And, the protagonist searches for the title of the book. That's the way things work. Harry Potter looked for the Chamber of Secrets. So the main character of the secret garden goes looking for the secret garden. So she finds an area that's walled off and sees a bird on top of it. And the bird whistles out to her. And this is different from the birds that they have in India. I'm not familiar with Indian birds. I guess they don't have cardinals there. Or robins. Robin, not a cardinal. When I first read the description, bright red bird, I thought, oh, it's a cardinal. Well, that's more of a North America thing. But robins are both. And so you had the robin, bright orange breast. And she goes and finds a groundskeeper. And she's like, I went into the orchard. And he's like, there's not a dog blocking the way. And he's gruff and mean and whatever. And then she mentions the robin, and he brightens up and he smiles. And it's amazing how much different people look when they smile, and how much the act of smiling shapes your face over time. And that someone who continuously smiles actually looks more attractive and friendlier, as opposed to someone who's like all the time. And these lines build up in your face. But if you're constantly smiling, it gives you a warm and more pleasing look. And so this guy's face lit up with the bird. And you hear the story about how he's kept this bird or been friends with this bird for years and years. So he's been friends with this bird, and he calls it, and the bird comes. Now, this is a thing that you can learn. There are people who are professional, or there are people who are bird callers, and they study the sounds of birds, and they learn to mimic them. And they mimic them so well that they actually are able to call the birds to them. So they make the sound, and the birds come. This is one of the ways that people hunt turkeys. So you make a sound of a turkey looking for a mate, and this is done during the turkey mating season, which is when the turkeys are hunted. So the turkeys get hunted during mating season. So you make the sound of a turkey looking for a mate, and then the turkey comes out looking, and then people go and shoot the turkeys, and that's turkey dinner. But there are people who do this and call different birds. And it's like, okay, this is a Carolina wren. Now, Carolina wrens. We have one that lives in the backyard. We call him Loudmouth because the Carolina wren is like this big. It is a tiny, tiny bird, but it is loud. And for months, we would hear this thing. And it makes this sound like chirpity, chirpity, chirpity. And it would make this sound. And we're like, what is making that sound? What bird is making that sound? And we'd go out and we'd look for it, and we wouldn't see anything because it's this little bird hiding up in the trees. Chirpity, chirpity, chirpity. That's Loudmouth. It's like, okay. Till finally, I saw him in the act, and he hopped a little bit and did it again. Because, if you hear a sound, it's coming from this direction or that direction. But, you can't really tell how far. And so I heard it, and I saw the bird move, and I heard it there. It's like, oh, that sound is coming from this little ball of feathers about yay big. I was like, it's smaller than my fist, but it is making more noise than I can. So, found the Loudmouth, looked them up in the Audubon guide. And, it's like, oh, this is a Carolina wren. And I played the sound on an app. It's like, yeah, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like it's saying chirpity. And so, we could call out to the wren, and sometimes he'd call back if we get it right, and sometimes he wouldn't. But, yeah, so you can call birds. And then she asks about the garden, and the guy goes mum. And then just up and leaves. So she's going to be trying to get into the garden, but we'll see how that goes. And she's also, more importantly, she's also learning to be a better person.